Hello, I'm Roger, and welcome to my synopsis of the JT Outfitters four-wheel disc brake conversion for the Toyota Land Cruiser FJ40. I have a 71, and this kit was designed to go up starting in the fall of 70. So this was what I consider to be a pretty straightforward application of their system. Overall, I would say it's a lot of work, and it's a good kit. I only have one tiny complaint we'll go over with later, but I'm going to walk you through everything that I had to do to get this thing operational. I've run it now for about a week as my daily driver, going out on 5, 10, 15 mile journeys around town. Today I got in the tie rod and kit, so we're putting in those, so hopefully I'll steer straighter. But for now, because I was taking off the front end, I thought I'd open it up and just show you everything that I went through to make this happen. So, to start off with, you have to remove the old disc, the old drum setup, which begins by removing the disc brake mounting plate. When I started, I jumped in without reading the instructions and took off the wheel cylinders and the lines and everything, you know, that was on the mounting plate. And then I chose to read the directions. As it turns out, you don't need to take anything off of the mounting plate. All you have to do is unhook the brake line from the mounting plate and remove the mounting plate all in one piece. But to remove the mounting plate, you have to get this hub off, which means you have to start here and then remove this and then remove the bearing and repack the bearing on the inside there, and then you can get to this. At a point of confusion, I called the JT Outfitters, and a guy, Joe, said that he doesn't use this dust shield. He considers it just to be a thing that holds dirt inside of the bearing. When you do this job, the things that I would consider are having plenty of grease and having a replacement grease seal for the race inside here. I think mine was good, so I didn't do it. Now, as I began the work, this is the mounting flange here, and it comes around right there. It's a hefty thing, and up to the challenge that it was given. So the things that you need to make sure are that the face that this mounts to is nice and clean, so that this mounts up flat and firmly in here. Then when it came time to start putting the calipers on here, I found that the caliper actually touched the axle housing right through here. So I put the grinder on that for a little bit to make space. This is the bump stop, the steering bump stop bolt holding flange. The bolt hits up against here. If you wanted to cut this flange off, there's no reason not to. But really it wasn't in the way, so there is no reason to. So, and then my next challenge was the brake lines. I was concerned that there wasn't going to be a good brake line setup. As it turned out, on the front end, it was just fine. And so that was a pretty straightforward thing. Except I had to grind the calipers. My focus keeps going in and out here. And grinding the caliper was, well, it's a simple matter of grinding it, but make sure you don't hit the face where the washer for the banjo bolt goes. But I ground off all of this flange around the edge so that the banjo bolt could go wherever I wanted it to. And second, I found that the grinding that they did was not quite sufficient to give high levels of clearance all around the caliper, having it, you know, be able to move in and out if, say, they got gravel in there or something like that. It was very, very close tolerances. So I ground out more than came on the factory setting. The JT Outfitters, more grinding than they did. And then when it was time to put on the disc onto the hub, as noted, the hub might be a bit large to fit inside of this opening right here. And so I had to grind that. I put it in four-wheel drive. I chalked that wheel over there and then put my 4-inch grinder on this side while it was spinning until this side was at the appropriate diameter. I bet I had to take off somewhere approaching 1/8 of an inch, and then this fit on. And then when it was time to assemble everything together, I put on the disc, and I just couldn't make the pad slide over the front edge of the disc. I must have been exhausted. Anyway, that's when I called Joe from JT Outfitters, and he was like, nope, it should fit. And you don't need that thing in, and you know, so anyway, he was right. The next morning, it fit just fine. I threw the wheel on and ran it in. It bled just fine. You know, everything was like it was supposed to be. Over here, I'll show you the setup as it is in place and ready to operate. So we've got the caliper there, we've got the mount right there, we've got the disc in place and the hub. So the hard part on this job was getting the hub on and off, and the grinding that I needed to do on the flange and on the caliper and on the axle housing. Besides that, it was pretty straightforward. Of course, I had to learn about all that, but fairly simple job. The next task was to put on the master cylinder. The master cylinder is this one for the four-wheel disc. That way the proportions of pressures for the rear and front are proper. If you use the old disc, the old master cylinder, they recommend a pressure proportioning valve that goes on the rear to lower the pressure in the rear so you don't get premature lockup. Side note, I did this job, because I hated the drum brakes. They're just ridiculous and antiquated. But second, I had gotten to the point that my rear brakes were locking up very prematurely and my front brakes weren't locking. So I would wind up in this rear skidding can't stop situation that was scaring the living piss out of me. So I was using my old master cylinder. Let's see if I just show that to you, which was actually a new master cylinder that I got, I don't know, possibly from JT Outfitters. I can't remember who. But that has a pressure valve in it that holds some pressure in the line so that the drum shoes don't back off the drum all the way, and it gives you quick pressure with the pedal when you apply the pedal. I suspect that the that the residual pressure valve in that master cylinder is what went bad and is the reason that I lost my front brakes and I started this whole job. Just a side note. So when I got to this job, the fluid housing was reversed. The body was sitting on this side of these two valves. It was turned around 180 degrees. And that meant that my line here coming out for my brake booster was interfering with this. I was pleased to find that I was able to unscrew the screw that sits right back here, flip it around, and it sat on just fine. The hole that goes through here, that goes through the plastic part through here, did not line up perfectly with this. It was about 2/3 of a hole off. So I was able to drill through here, through the plastic, and I'll let you see it here, and make a new hole so that I could mount this thing reversed, and that gave me the space I needed in order to do this. So now I bled the front end. I had the front end sorted. Everything seems great to me, and it was time to start on the back end. So let me get the light. Pow! And it was time to do the back end. The back end was for me a bit harder. It took a little bit longer. I did learn the lesson of the front end in that I did not remove all of the stuff off of the backing plate. There was no need. So the back end, in order to get this off, you have to remove, in order to put this on, you have to remove the old backing plate. In order to get the backing plate off, you have to get it over the axle flange. So you have to take out the axles in here, which means you have to remove the differential cover and remove the C-clips. Oh, come on. Focus. Anyway, you have to do all of the differential work that you have to do to get the axles out. That's not a real tough job. It's pretty straightforward. The instructions on it are pretty good. And then it was time to put on the mounting plate, the bracket for this caliper. Now, if you can see here, there's 2 tines on this bracket. 1 tine out of the top and 1 tine out of the bottom. Now the tines and then the bracket is held in place. Let's see if we can't get some lighting in here. Let's see, right there. The bracket has 2 bolts. There were 3 bolts on top and 3 bolts on the bottom for the brake mounting plate. This bracket has 2, and if you notice, there's 2 tiered flange, an outer tier and then one closer to the axle itself. There's a spacer that fills in that gap so that when you mount this thing on, it lays flat. Be sure to take a file and flat file and clean up that face so that everything sits flat. And then it was time to figure out the orientation of the tines, because, well, this thing can go on fundamentally 4 ways. There is no direct right and wrong way to attach this, but I did find a couple of restrictions. One restriction is, if you look right here, and hopefully you can see it, there's a sharper corner in the cut right there. That sharper corner corresponds with a metal casting knob on the caliper. And so when you put on the caliper, if you're not going to do any extra grinding on the caliper, you need to make sure that those two pieces line up. The caliper itself is restricted on the way you can put it because you want the bleeder valve to be up. So that means that instead of having 4 ways you can put the mounting casting, the mounting bracket, there's now only 2 ways, because the sharp corner corresponds to the bleed valve being up, with the sharp corner being up. Then you have a possible forward-facing orientation or a possible rear-facing orientation. I found no way to discern which one of those is proper. I think either one might have worked, but I wound up putting it forward. I think that I might have done the wrong answer. Here's another restricting factor. This caliper mounting bolt, when you back it out, when the tines were in the down position, right? Because you could flip this over and mount it tines low. When the tines were in the low position, this caliper bolt was interfering with the springs right here. So I couldn't get the caliper mounting bolt out all the way. So that meant that on the front position, it had to be tines up. With the bleeder up, it meant that I had it wrong. So the way that this thing needs to go, all right, I got it sharp now, is tines up facing backwards. And I couldn't find any photos on the internet to tell me this. Tines up facing backwards, that puts the acute corner on the mounting plate on the upside, which corresponds with the bleeding position on the caliper being up. And what was the third thing? Oh, and the bolts not interfering with the leaves. When I was doing this myself, not knowing why things should be, and only trying so many different alternatives before just finding something that worked, I didn't want the caliper sitting on the same side as the shocks. And it seemed to me, when I started in the process, that getting this itty bitty little hose attached to the rest of the brake line was going to be simpler from the front. Therefore, in making my decisions, I found that it took substantial grinding on the inside edge of the caliper there and around of, I think, 3 tabs plus the grinding here at the banjo bolt to get this thing to sit the way I wanted it to sit. So with that finally sorted and my caliper in place, it came time for the challenge of getting the brake line fixed. I recommend that when you do this job, go ahead and buy the expensive brake line option that JT Outfitters has for this project. There was no possible way I could get this itty bitty little hose to match up with the existing lines on this axle. It just wasn't going to happen. Whether I had this thing mounted frontwards or backwards or inside out, it wasn't going to happen. So I wound up having to replaced the larger lines on the axle with stuff I got from AutoZone. The system that they have, I was real pleased with. They had these flex lines that I could buy and make fit for the lines. So I'm going to lower the door here so that I have better lighting and I can show you. But so these lines from AutoZone, they came with a bender which had too large of a radius for me. So I wound up mounting everything off of bending everything on sockets by hand, which was a real pain. So I had to reroute this around the edge. Boy, the focus on this camera is uncooperative today. Anyway, as you can see, looking over here, I had to build in an S across the top of the axle to eat up about an extra 4 inches of line to get it around to this side. On the other side, I had to do a pretty hefty zigzag. Let's see if I can't get that one shown with the 8-inch line in order to get that to eat up the proper amount of space, and also to go around where the axle bump stop. See, where is the axle bump stop? Yeah, there it is, the axle bump stop, and the U-bolts. So they were trying to interfere there. So I had to wind up doing a pretty hefty S between this location here, came out here, did a bend here, and out here, and then the line goes in to the caliper. And if you take a look, I ground all this stuff out so I could put the banjo in any direction I wanted to. And there's a little teeny tiny S in here so that it has some room to flex when the caliper moves back and forth. Like I said, I recommend just going ahead and buying the lines that JT Outfitters offers, because this line does not offer enough flexibility to be able to put the calipers on and off with the pads in position. And you can't lay the caliper on the leaf or anything like that when you're doing maintenance. It's just too ridiculously short. And then I bled the rears, and after bleeding the rears, she was good to drive. I had the rears done. Oh, when you go back and do the rears, the things you need to be prepared for are, you should probably have a new axle seal, or be prepared to get a grease seal on the outside of the axle here. And you will need a gasket for the differential cover, and maybe some gasket fluid. So, some gasket seal all, and 2.6 quarts of lubrication. And I think that pretty much covers the details. So on the front, I had to grind more off the calipers. I had to remove and replace the hub, and clean that up, grind that. Don't need that layer there, don't need that there. And everything went pretty smooth. Up here, I had to flip this around, and back there, you have to take out the axles, put the axles back in, and figure out what you're going to do about the brake lines, because the brake lines they send you are not going to do what you need them to do. I've enjoyed it. The brakes have been working well. I will say that they're not fully scrubbed in yet, but I think I am getting a bit of premature lockup on the rear before I am ready to have the rear lock up. I'd rather have, the front push a little bit more. So if you are considering doing this yourself, I wonder if the correct answer might be to use the stock master cylinder with their rear bias adjuster. I think that might give you a little bit more control. Do I think this is a good system? A good product? Yes. It's a good product. With rare exception, it had everything I needed. It's a custom job, right? So everything is custom. It's for me, never having done it before, there was a lot of doing things 3 and 4 times. I did the front on this side. I bet I had this thing off 4 times by the time I finished stupiding my way around this setup. And at the rear, I know that figuring out the situation with which way the tines can go, that I know I put it on at least 4 times, trying to wrap my head around what to do there. I had to learn about this assembly. I'd never taken it apart before. I had done the rear differential axles, even reset the differential a couple of times, so I was familiar with that. This job probably took me, I had 30 hours to do, but I gotta say a lot of that time was learning. If I knew how to do it, I could probably knock this out now in a day. I bet if you were really good, you could do it in less than that. So an idiot will take all week, practiced will take a day, and a pro will take a half a day. So there you go. Hope this helps. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will try to answer. I think it's a good product. Bye.